I'm Kieran O'Kelly. I am a Director of Distance Education and the Masters in Specialized Ministries at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago.
I'm Aldana Lingertot from St. John Seminary in Boston. I'm the Director of the Master of Arts in Ministry program.
Scott Woodward, I'm the Dean at Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio, Texas.
I'm Robert Ludwig. I'm the Dean of Pastoral Studies at the Loyola University of Chicago.
And so this morning we heard a presentation from Dr. Bill Cahoy and came up with 8 points of convergence on several essays that were written by some authors present here. And then we had some workshops. Do you have any new insights or thoughts on things that we discussed this morning that you'd like to share with us?
Well, at our table, we raised a lot of questions about these points of convergence. On the one hand, many of them we simply totally agreed with, but when it gets into some of these questions about distinctions and authorizations, that raises some issues for us. And I think we're fearful about the clericalization of lay ministry, and we're fearful about distracting ourselves from the larger issue of the universal call to vocation and the importance of understanding the laity as the church. And so those are concerns, and we know there's a special role for people, but there's a lot of special roles, and I'm wondering which ones are going to be picked out and which ones aren't going to be picked out. What about the head of campus ministry at a Catholic university? Is that a lay minister? Well, who authorizes it? The university? Or what about the question of chaplaincies in various institutions? What about the theologian or the high school religion teacher or the campus ministers in the high schools? So we're not so anxious. We want to rush towards authorization without thinking about some of these practical issues. So that's a changed perspective that I got over the last 24 hours, and it reflects some of what's been going on at our table.
Yeah, certainly the issue of authorization is a double-edged sword. It brings strength to the position and to the person who is authorized, but it also raises the questions that Bob has listed and presents issues of who authorizes for what position. One woman at our table is canon lawyer. What's the community that really authorizes her? To what community would be present for any sort of ritualization of that authorization or anything of that sort? So those are kinds of questions that have been coming up. But in general, I think people were okay with the idea of authorization, but there are some questions about how that can work, how it works.
I've found the conversations very rich and very thought-provoking. I've noticed that terms are used in different ways, so the conversation is very important to make sure we define terms in the same way, such as authorization. Is authorization a blessing when the pastor asks the community to pray for the new DRE? Is that the authorization? Can we define it as such? Even the word ecclesial came up in one of our breakout sessions. Do we understand that in that broad theological sense of body of Christ? So I think conversation is just invaluable, and it's been thought-provoking.
One of the issues that I think came up for me more clearly in this conversation, particularly around the issue of how lay leaders in a parish who may have no education or particular competencies and the other kinds of things that are associated with the profession in the United States thinking, how are those people raised up? How are they identified? It's a broader question for Catholic Church as a whole as to how do we find and promote our leadership and support them, not only in initial formation, but throughout their lives as ministers in the church. We've kind of had a vocation office, if you will, in many places for the ordained, but there hasn't been as much time and attention and investment in the future of our church in some of the other areas of lay ministry. And that would also encourage young people to consider lay ministry, because they have a sense that there will be some sense of security, some sort of sustained opportunity for them to work in the church for a lifetime, and some stability in the church. So the broader question of how does a parish get their next DRE or identify their next DRE, perhaps from the parish itself, and then bring that person to the level of competency required by the diocese or by the ecclesial structures that they serve, do Catholics as a whole need to wake up to their responsibility for that support and affirmation of the leadership that they find among themselves?
So our next question is, given the landscape that Dr. Ammerman presented to us last night, the challenges, how does that affect our understanding of vocation and authorization, and help us to encourage people to enter into lay ecclesial ministry?
I was struck listening to Dr. Ammerman's overview of the statistics on family statistics, on church-going, membership, and the diminishment of numbers. And then I look at the reality. My experience has been a very blessed one. I have seen so many lay people come forward to learn more about their faith, not even clear where they're going to minister and where they're going to serve the church, that I'm just struck by how much the Spirit is truly at work, and how much our communities encourage and bring forth from the grassroots up these wonderful people.
Yeah, historically, new forms of ministry have come out of pastoral need. And I think that's where we are today. I think that's the experience we're really sharing with one another in talking about lay ecclesial ministry. The explosion in the numbers of Catholics that we have, and shrinking numbers of traditional ministers, clergy, religious. New forms of ministry are coming forward and coming out, and I think we're finally to the point of having enough experience with that to be able to talk about it in terms of vocation and in terms of being self-generating. That is, that someone's going to pick up the ball when this first run goes through, as it did with mendicants when they arose, as it did with even when presbyters suddenly were assigned with the task of assisting the bishop at the Eucharist, by celebrating at other locations. So I mean, I think it's the same sort of situation where we have a need for ministers and a need to support the work of the church and the people of God. And the Spirit is providing this energy in moving that forward, as it has throughout our history.
I like to think about the landscape that she laid out there in terms of Loyola University as a whole, which our major ministry is to the undergraduates. It's not to the lay ecclesial ministers. It's trying to basically evangelize young people into a vision of gospel living. We talk about a moral compass, commitment to social justice, and adult faith. Those things are critical, and I think right now very many young people are not being afforded a real experience of Christian community and an opportunity to grow in those ways. And I think the places where they are, not only are we finding a really vital young people's faith, we're also finding people coming forth for ministry roles. So for instance, out of the volunteer programs that the various religious communities have started, that's a tremendous source of vocations to lay ministry. We're at Loyola, that's our bread and butter. If there weren't any of these programs, I don't know where we'd be with young people today. And then we get a lot of people too that are coming forth from midlife or from at the end of their career, retiring and saying, you know, I want to make my life count the rest of my life. So I think we need to really focus on the teleology of all ministry, which is creating a people that makes a difference in the world. If that were the heart of the Catholic life, and I think that's what her landscape was saying we need to be about, we wouldn't have to worry about leadership. It would be coming forth in all kinds of ways.
One of the things that struck me about Dr. Ammerman's presentation last evening was the landscape has changed so much that the parish becomes even more important in this century than it might have been in the second half of the last century because of the number of times people move, the number of times people change jobs, the number of social networks they have that might replace traditional families or extended families that they might be living near. All of these things suggest to me that the parish ministry becomes extremely important for anchoring an individual in the kind of Catholic Christian tradition and values that they might have found from Grandma if they lived with Grandma, or from Uncle Harry, or just down the street if they lived there their entire lives from their friends and neighbors. That movement means tremendous change on a frequent basis for people, and that anchor will become more and more important. Secondly, though, in terms of ministry, I do wonder, will the lay minister of the future need to be more stable than the typical young American of the present in order to kind of develop relationships, provide continuity, have the kind of relational connection, shall we say, because we don't know what exactly it would be with a diocesan structure as well as a pastoral unit like a parish. So those are kind of questions that are both emphasizing the parish importance. At the same time, I ask myself, how will that lay minister function in the parish? I don't think it will be the same. I don't think it can be the same, and I don't think the lay minister who's coming up will be the same as people my age from, I don't want to say how long ago, when we all got our start. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. It's good talking to you.